Hi everyone, welcome to CMC Conversations. I'm Parishi Kanuga and I'm a class of 26 here at CMC, and today we're going to be talking with Sanaa, who's a class of 25. So hi Sanaa, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi Parishi, I'm studying philosophy at CMC, and the summer of my freshman year I wrote this cookbook, How to Be a Fearless Cook.
Awesome. So what got you to write this cookbook?
Well, when I was figuring out what to do for my summer, as a freshman, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I wanted to do an internship, and I was getting a lot of emails about the Appel Fellowship, which is a first-year writing fellowship that was founded by a CMC alum, Joel Appel, who had such an incredible experience writing at CMC, and it had such an impact on his ability to write that he decided to create this fellowship to encourage further writing. And basically what it entails is that students will receive a grant of a considerable sum to pursue some sort of travel or experience centered around a writing project. And so I decided to travel to India and make this cookbook.
So have you been cooking in your life, and what's your experience cooking Indian food?
Well, I believe that, so I started cooking in high school, but I think that I've been learning how to cook since I was born and have been eating food, because I think that culinary education, 50% of it is just eating and understanding flavor, because it is building an intuition is what it means to sort of learn how to cook. And so I think that that's been going on for quite some time, but I actually never learned how to cook Indian food. For the whole time I was in high school, I sort of did meal prep, and I did a lot of self-taught Italian food. My mother is an incredible cook, which is what sort of motivated my interest in food, and she taught me basic skills, but I had never learned how to do Indian food just because it requires such a comprehensive skill set, and it is a very complex flavor palette. And so by the time I left for college, I had never cooked Indian food, and so I thought that this would be the perfect opportunity to do it.
That makes a lot of sense. Indian food is very complicated, but you haven't cooked Indian food all your life, and then you write a cookbook that is an Indian cookbook. Can you explain that?
For a lot of Appel Fellowships, the projects typically center around some sort of problem or question, and the problem or question that I wanted to address was the effect of globalization and shifting family structures on Indian cooking, because Indian cooking is typically passed down through folk knowledge. It's sort of an exchange that happens only verbally, and it's not a matter of recipes, it's a matter of dishes. And so typically the way it'll happen is two generations standing by the stove together, and the older one will teach the younger one how to cook by starting cooking while the younger one watches, and then eventually the roles will reverse. And so I think that's a really unique exchange, and it's one that my mother wasn't able to go through before she left home, before she left Delhi for the US, for grad school, and so she had never learned her mother's cooking. She learned how to cook Indian food just intuitively from eating her mother's cooking growing up, but she never had that sort of traditional culinary exchange. And then by the time I left for college, I realized I never did either. And so I wanted to address sort of the impact that globalization is posing on this culinary exchange, because increasingly situations like me and my mother are arising. And so I traveled to India for 2.5 weeks, and my aunt, who did have the opportunity to learn my grandmother's entire culinary repertoire before she passed away, taught me how to cook.
So the way that you describe learning cooking by intuition instead of recipe, I feel like that's similar to learning a language through acquisition versus looking at a vocab textbook and picking it up through that. So I think that's a lot more effective, because you kind of build out a way to cook on your own, and you kind of teach yourself at a certain point. So how do you integrate that into a cookbook, which would normally have recipes?
Right. So I think a lot of it is in how you're supposed to use the cookbook. So in the beginning, the way that the cookbook is set up is, before I get into all of the different chapters and stuff, I have notes on use. Well, I have an introduction explaining the whole motivation for this style of a cookbook, and then notes on use and a tour of the kitchen. The purpose of those two chapters, or sections of the book, is to sort of provide you with the tools that you would have if you were learning how to cook in an Indian kitchen. So Notes on Use talks about like some basic things that you need to know to use the book. So like in Indian cooking, you always have to have your spice box with you, and you typically want some kind of vegetable oil or butter nearby as well, because those are going to be your essential sort of tools for making a tarka. And a tarka is the base of most Indian dishes. It's the oil like that you use to cook the dish, and some spices. There's typically a base, which is either jeera, which is cumin, or rye, which are mustard seeds. And so that is like your base of your dish. And so I talk about how in each recipe in Notes on Use, how in each recipe it's not going to tell you to use your spice box, because you need to know that you're going to have your spice box with you. It should be like some sort of like second arm, basically. And then I also talk about how when you're done, this cookbook is not supposed to be something that you take out every time you want to make a recipe. It's supposed to be something that you use to learn how to cook Indian food. And obviously it's not going to be the same as that sort of traditional exchange that you get in an Indian kitchen with an older generation. But it's supposed to be a tool to familiarize yourself with the skills and the tools that you need to cook good Indian food, which is not available in the US because of the sort of exchange of like US and like American flavors on Indian cooking. Like they add sugar and milk, and like it's not supposed to be like that. There's a richness that you can only really create through this intuition. And so basically that was a long tangent, but you're supposed to use this book to learn how to cook and then throw it away for all I care. Like you're not supposed to need it to make an Indian dish. It's supposed to teach you how to cook Indian food. And so then that second section that I mentioned, a tour of the kitchen, basically takes you through your spice box, and it takes you through the different, like it tells you what a tarka is and how to make that, and some other hacks that my aunt taught me, and all of those basic foundational tools that you need to cook Indian food.
Yeah. So you said we use the cookbook and we throw it away. And I feel like that's a very brave thing to say. If I wrote a book, I would never tell anyone to throw it away. So I think that's really cool. And the fact that like you don't tell them which spices to use, and the fact that you don't even give that type of guidance, at first that might be daunting. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, like I don't know how I'm supposed to flavor this, how I'm supposed to season this to be good. But I think that allows people to have some type of like experimentation. Mm-hmm. And like you're teaching them how to bike, you give them the training wheels, but then you just take those off really quickly. And I think that's how you learn. That's the best way to learn, just like throwing yourself into it.
There is like some guidance in each of the dishes in like which flavor profiles, because that's something I also talk about. Another important part of the book and how it's formatted as like more of an instructional tool is the way that it's structured. Yeah. So like the order of the chapters and stuff like that. And so there are a few different cuisines within Indian food that I cover. So my mother's family is traditionally from Gujarat, which has very unique flavor profile. It's like basically the goal of that type of food is striking a balance between sweet, sour, and spicy.
I'm actually also from Gujarat, so yeah.
We've talked about this. But yeah, I love Gujarati food. Yeah. It's like an incredible flavor that is very unique. And so it's about striking that balance, whereas North Indian food is another area that I cover a lot. And that has a very different flavor profile because my family is from Delhi and they live in Delhi, and so that's in North India, and that's much more rich, like comfort food, which my favorite recipe in the whole book is maki dal, which is like a richer dal, and my mother's favorite is Gujarati dal, which I don't know if you've had Gujarati dal, but it's very different. Maki dal is it's very rich, but it's not heavy, and so basically all of that is to say is that in Indian food, I think it's about familiarizing yourself with the flavor profile and then understanding that flavor profile and understanding how to create it. And so I do explain which spices correspond, and I do give suggestions in each dish, but it is about if you disagree with me, then don't follow my suggestion. That's the whole point. It's supposed to like you're supposed to build an intuition and become a fearless cook. And so I'm not the authority. I'm just someone trying to help you out.
Yeah, a fearless cook makes their own rules. Yeah. I think one thing that you brought up is like the difference between Makhi dal and Gujarati dal. And I think that has to do with like a lot of cuisines. We think of like Indian food as like, okay, we have like paneer and we have naan, and that's what I get when I call my Indian takeout place. And then you have Mexican food, we have like burritos and tacos. But when you think about food at a very in-depth level, and you think about like these different regions have different foods because of these different like geographies, different ingredients, histories. Like food tells such a story that's like similar to like what music tells and what art tells. And I just like intuitively never thought of food as an art. I always thought of it as like, okay, like I just eat food. But if you like really start to think about it and are like really mindful about the experience, if you're like tasting all the flavors, one thing that my dad told me one time is like when I'm eating like, I don't know, even like a smoothie bowl, like I find it like a fascinating experience because I think about like where these bananas came from, and then these strawberries came from a completely different place, and like this granola, like the process of making all of that, like it's like it's just like this blend of different things all around the world, and it just tells you a lot. So I think we should all just be more mindful of like our food and just think a lot more about it.
That also kind of speaks to a second part of this project, that I did all of this culinary like education and stuff like that, but there was also a research component. I talked to, which is the final chapter before the conclusion, it's called The Burning Question. And the question I wanted to answer was, why do people cook? Because especially in India, a lot of labor is very cheap and accessible. And so a lot of people have cooks, and there's also a lot of different like ways to access food now. Like there's so much more takeout easily available. There are a lot of other cooking options. Like, so you don't have to cook in this day and age. It's not like out of necessity anymore, which is kind of where this tradition that I'm like made this whole book to sort of honor, it came from. And so I was wondering like what was going to keep that going. Like how would this tradition, even in spite of globalization, like just with a modernizing world, like how would this tradition be upheld? And so I talked to like an array, basically all of the Indian people I know and could talk to, like in different, like people who lived in India and people who didn't, people who were born in India and people who weren't, and different generations, different genders, and to sort of understand why, and people who don't cook and people who do cook, and to understand why the people who do cook do decide to cook. And the two most interesting sort of demographics were the women who were middle-aged and didn't cook and lived in India, or even if they didn't, and the men who were younger especially, but really of any generation, and did cook. Because for the women who didn't learn how to cook and were of the middle-aged generation, like that was the generation in which this tradition was still very much upheld and was necessary. And the men, it was different because they had no expectation to cook, and so why were they cooking? And I found the most interesting person to talk to was actually my dad's sister, who she does not cook, and she's in her 50s. And I was wondering why she didn't cook. And she explained that she learned how to cook when she needed to, and she got those recipes from, or rather dishes, because in Indian food there aren't really recipes, but she got those dishes that my grandmother would always cook. My grandmother's on my dad's side is also an excellent cook. And she got those dishes and learned how to cook, but then she found a chef who has worked for her for like 20 years and taught them all those recipes, and so she still has those dishes in her household, and that's what's important to her. And so she's able to maintain all of those things. And across all of the other people I talked to, like the women who still cook and the men who cook, I asked, why do you still cook? And the overall across the board answer was, because I love food.
Yeah.
And so I think that is like, I kind of got away from what you were talking about, but the point is like food is one of those ineffable things, like music, like you were talking about, or you can't really describe why you do it or like why it's an art, but it is an art because there's something so intangible and so important about it that we can't really quantify, but we do it because we love it and we care about it, which kind of goes to what it means to be a fearless cook.
Yeah, so art, I would say, is like any type of object or experience that would elicit some type of emotion in the viewer, or that intends to elicit that. And the thing about an emotion is you can describe what it is using words. You can say, yeah, I feel happy, I'm so happy, or like, yeah, that makes me like so nostalgic, but you can't really like replicate it through language. Like an emotion is just like what it is in and of itself, and you can't really like you can't really get at it aside from like what the experience is. So your experience eating like some type of dal or like eating some type of dish that your aunt makes is very different from my experience eating it, because there's a lot of like familial ties and like a lot of your experience that will affect you differently. And I think that's what art is. And if we start to view our food that we eat every day as an art, even dining hall food, you know, like I think that it's just going to make the experience so much more beautiful. And like everything that we do, even like when we're like, I don't know, using our phones and we like see pictures that people have taken on social media, or like we're looking at like different designs on our clothes when we're wearing different things. Like if we think of like everything as like something that has been intentionally designed in a certain way, like I think it just like makes the experience of living so much beautiful. And I think that's what intuition gets to. It's like, what steps am I going to take to allow me to enjoy this more? And in making your own food, I feel like, I mean, I'm not much of a cook. I can make smoothie bowls and I can make cheese quesadillas.
Two very important dishes,
yeah. That's about it. So, but like even when I'm making that, like it's not like I follow a recipe. Yeah, I use intuition. I don't even know how to cook. So I think if we start tapping into that a lot more, we can make like our cooking experience and our recipes a lot more personal, because it's like what we know that we like instead of what's told to us. And we kind of start to build out our own unique skills.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And again, like I've hinted a lot about like the fearless aspect of cooking, but I think like that what you're saying about intuition and like how we all have it kind of speaks to that. Basically, I'm going to go back to my grandmother, because she was really, my mother's mother was the whole reason that this cookbook exists, because I knew that my grandmother's repertoire was something like so incredible. My mother talks about the way that she cooks, and I could never really, she would always just say she was a fearless cook, and I never really understood what that meant until I like went on this experience. But my mom would describe like they would go on train journeys and to different, that's the travel they did, is they traveled all around India and like basically ate all these different cuisines, and they would stop at a different place, and like there would be like 20 minutes before the next, like before the train went on, and my grandmother would run off the train and like get whatever that place's delicacy was, and then bring it onto the train, and they would all eat it, and then they would go home, and my grandmother would be able to exactly replicate it just from that one bite. And like she would know what all the ingredients were when she tasted something.
That's so cool.
And my mother is similar. She just knows what makes a dish work. She has that intuition, and it's something so intangible. Like, and I don't know, it seems, I used to think that my grandmother, like the way my mother would talk about it, I used to think she literally had superpowers. Like it just doesn't sound like something that can happen naturally. But now that I've done this and understand more what goes into a culinary intuition, I don't really claim to be there yet, but I understand what it takes to be a fearless cook, because food, in my opinion, as I've described very passionately so far, is something so important, and it has such a power over me. Like I talk about this in the conclusion because I had this sort of realization, but it is like the most important thing. It's what connects me to India, and it's what connects me to the US. It's what like keeps me alive. It's one of the most important things. And so to be able to to be able to make food and realize it, and also to do so just on my own intuition and trust that I know how to do it requires like a certain level of fearlessness, which is what I think means is what I think it means to be a fearless cook. Like even me, I didn't cook Indian food until this summer, but I was able to, I think I'm already becoming a decent Indian cook, and just from eating Indian food for years, and also just from caring about food so much. And so I think that's kind of how it goes. But I am really grateful to have had the opportunity to go and do it, because I don't know that I would have been able. You do have to take time to kind of commit and decide you want to learn how to take on the task of cooking and familiarizing yourself with the repertoire. I captured like such a small facet of my grandmother's repertoire, and there are like 53 recipes in here. So that kind of tells you something about the scope of such a project. But I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to dedicate that time. And I think that it really did sum up what a freshman summer is supposed to be. It's you pick something that you're really passionate about and that you really like care about and you're intensely interested in, and even if it doesn't relate to your career goals and like what you want to do with your life, you take that opportunity and just pursue it, and then next summer you can worry about sort of internships and all of that.
Well, now I really want to try your Indian food, so is there any way that you could cook for me on campus?
Well, I did throw a dinner party way back when, freshman year, in Janie's kitchen, and it was a great success. All of my friends came. It is difficult to organize sort of dinner party with so many people with so many schedules. People are very busy at CMC, and so I haven't gotten the chance to do it again, but I did talk with one of my friends about maybe doing an event in Janie's kitchen where I cook some of this Indian food and to sort of like celebrate my cookbook. And so I will let you know if that happens.
Awesome. And also, if I want to get this cookbook, or if anybody wants to get it and become a fearless cook, how do we do that?
Well, it is available on Amazon, where I self-published it, and so I can send you the link.
Awesome. Okay, the link will be posted. So, anyways, thank you so much for coming, and this was inspiring to me. I think I'm going to start cooking Indian food, maybe teach myself a dish or two. And I think you really went into being a fearless cook, but I think just following your intuition and trying to build your knowledge, that's something that we do at CMC, just becoming as knowledgeable as possible about certain subjects, then you have an intuitive understanding of how the world works. So I think from being a fearless cook, we can learn how to just be fearless in general. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Parishi.
Yeah. Thank you for watching CMC Conversations, and tune in next time.